Our guest is singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist Arwen Lewis. Arwen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on Booked on Rock. This is so exciting.
I'm looking forward to this. Before we get into the music that you've created, talk about how music was such a big part of your life. Your dad is Peter Lewis from the band Moby Grape, and there's a great quote from you on your website that I hope you can expand on. You said, quote, "I remember listening to Moby Grape when I was younger and realizing how they've influenced a lot of authentic rock and roll and even had some similarities to the punk music I loved. It's like they were unknowingly setting something up for the artists that would come along years after them." That's an interesting observation regarding their punk influence. So if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I don't listen to a lot of punk music anymore, but it was when I was kind of in high school, when I started kind of diving into Moby Grape's music as well. I listened to it a lot when I was growing up. It was background music all of the time, kind of in the house or on car rides and things like that. But um, I developed my own relationship with it later, when I started listening to it on my own. And yeah, at that point, I guess I was listening to bands like Pennywise and NoFX and AFI, and there were songs from Moby Grape like "Fall on You" or like "Murder in My Heart for the Judge" and things like that that had that same spirit, of just like singing about something that you're passionate about that was not risque but emotional, and the delivery of it was very rock and roll and kind of unfiltered. And I think that's and musically too, kind of like it drove and like punched kind of the same way like the punk music I was listening to did. And I don't think that Moby Grape had any intention of, setting up like a genre for punk. I don't Obviously punk wasn't around at that point, but it was rock and roll, and punk's rooted in rock. And I think that that's kind of the tradition of rock, and before rock, like folk music. And, I think in pop music, any kind of pop, interpretation, whether it's like rock or like pop R&B or pop soul or pop punk or pop this, pop that, like it's got, like every band influences the next one to come along, and whoever the people, who was Pennywise listening to when they were growing up, that just becomes kind of engraved, I think, in your subconscious as a musician and a creator. And I know this happened with like Led Zeppelin, like they accidentally like wrote a song that was like completely part of like one of Moby Grape songs, and it was just because like it was like engraved in Robert Plant's, memory. And like how often does it happen? And even nowadays, now it gets kind of crazy with people suing each other over their, their melodies and things like that. And I guess that used to happen back in the day too, but I think a lot of the time I think it's just like an honest like oversight. um but yeah, I just think that people generally influence each other as artists and musicians, and that's part of the community of, popular music.
One of my favorite phrases is taking the music past where you found it.
Yeah.
That was in one of the movies on the blues, and it's such a great phrase. What about the artists that you listen to, like Billie Holiday and Miles Davis, Hendrix? You mentioned on your website. Who are
Yeah.
the bands and artists that you loved listening to growing up?
Oh, yeah, those three. And I really love like Tim Hardin. Tim Hardin's got this really like rich, he's like a folk musician, but there was something more like really, when those songs really just like the melodies and the words that they're saying are just like so rich and deep that you can't like put a finger on like how they make you feel. It just really moves you. I think in Billie Holiday and Jimi Hendrix, of course, like he's done for so many people, and Miles Davis, they all did that with their music. It was completely came from their soul. I think anything that really is like soul stirring really moves me and inspires me. And that's why it catches my attention, because it makes me feel something.
If you had to pick a favorite female vocalist, who would it be?
Joni Mitchell.
Joni Mitchell. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, or like, I don't know, Chrissy Hine
There's
or
another good one.
Joan Jett. Hey, I love Beyonce.
All right. How about
I
Stevie?
like Alison Mozart. I love Stevie Nicks.
Yeah.
I really love Alison Mozart too. Do you know the Dead Weather or the Kills?
No.
They're like rock kind of heavy bands, but yeah, she's really cool. You should look her up. She's just a cool rock singer.
I always feel for Christine McVie because she was so good. The song she did with Fleetwood Mac, but Stevie gets so much of the notoriety. But boy, she was a great vocalist as well. Songbird from the Rumors album, beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful.
It's always like that, right? God, how many like, and you probably know this too from having your podcast, how many crazy talented musicians are there in the world? Like it's
Yes,
insane. It's wild. It's beautiful.
which leads to yes, it's when I was younger, I just thought, well, if this person's famous, that means they're good. If you're not famous, you're not good,
Yeah.
and that is not the case at all. And the business side of music, it all just kind of right place, right time. But then again, there are artists who really don't want to be commercial. They just like things the way they are because they're just following their heart and soul and sharing it with others, and they don't need to be famous and all that stuff. So, but yeah, record labels. How much experience have you had with record labels?
I've had enough great experience with one label. OMAD Records is my
Yeah,
label from New York City. I got very lucky with them. Um, John D. Nicola is the owner and this head of OMAD Records, and he was my first producer. And he's the one who had the idea to make the Moby Grape album. So he knew I had been working with my dad, and he was like, "Let's make an album of Arwen singing Moby Grape songs." And like, and this happened later, like after I kind of started listening to them. And I was like, that's kind of audacious of me to present myself that way, but sure. And it was great, a great experience. I went to Manhattan and I did all my vocals with John in the studio. He hired like the best of the best studio musicians to play all the parts. And then I went back a second time, and we did like a show at the bitter end, about like a little radio tour from New Jersey to New York. And that was really cool. And so that was my first experience. And of course, OMAD put that out. And then my recent EP, Under the Stars, that I co-produced, I did all that. I mean, I didn't play all those parts, but I co-produced that all on my own. That was really pretty much my vision. And my co-producer, Jonathan McEwen, helped me bring it to life in a way that, in ways that, musically I wouldn't have heard. And that's why I worked with him, because I knew he could do that. And then from there, all the musicians that I was around at that point were able to bring the music to life. Like, I didn't really tell people what to play. I just knew that all of the musicians would play a certain way because of, their own musicianship. And I knew that like that group of people would be able to bring those songs to life in the way that they did. And it's exactly how I would have wanted to express myself as an artist. And luckily, John put that out too. And then it's another something else coming out, a collaboration pretty soon here in a couple
oh, cool.
weeks that's
Okay,
coming out on the label, but I can't talk about it quite yet, but that's going to be pretty exciting too.
okay.
So, and anyway, so OMAD's been great. Like OMAD basically just gives the artist, he hand selects his artists. It's a boutique label, and he just lets people do what they do, and as long as you're saying something, like I have a complete thought musically or artistically with what you're presenting to the label, John is really supportive of that. And I think that's so important to maintain the authenticity of indie artists, especially. Um,
I'm not surprised to
they're,
hear that because John was on this podcast.
oh
He,
yeah, was
yeah, he,
he?
he was on to talk about his contributions to Dirty Dancing,
Nice.
right? And
Yeah.
you could tell he just loves music, just the actual creation of a song. So, not surprised to hear that.
Yeah, no, John's I mean, he's such a cool bass player. He's just a great, he can play any instrument. But yeah, he's an incredible musician, and that's what makes him such a great producer and record label owner as well, because he's a musician. He understands music. Yeah, like I think as long as there's a certain sophistication in the music, and you're an artist on the label, you are supported.
That's cool to have a label like that supports the artist. Yeah, 12 Moby Grape songs on that album. That was 2015.
Yeah.
It's titled Arwen, and
Uh-huh.
people could find that. It's on Spotify. It's on the right. And
Yep.
one of the songs on there, maybe my favorite, Omaha, which is, I guess you could say that's probably the most popular song of Moby Grape. What a great song. What is your favorite Moby Grape song?
I can't. There's too many. Mr. Blues. Bob Mosley sings a song, Mr. Blues, that I just love. Bitter Wind. I Am Not Willing. My dad was actually just telling me Though all these songs, of course, are not on that record. I love all the ones on the record too. But the I Am Not Willing has a fun story. My dad at the time was living with well, later Jean Louis was a dress designer in Hollywood for all the films, and he ended up marrying my grandmother very later in life. They were just best friends, and both their spouses had gone, so they just finished their life together. But Jean Louis and his wife at the time, Maggie Louis, were kind of like my dad's second parents, and he was staying with them. I don't know, just for a visit for a few weeks, and that time, Rudolf Nureyev had just come to America, and he was a friend of the Louis. And so Rudolf Nureyev was staying with them too. And they had Maggie Louis was a concert pianist, and they had this beautiful grand piano in their living room. And my dad was just sitting at the piano one day, and Rudolf Nureyev was sitting by the piano, and he wrote "I Am Not Willing." And it is like John D. Nicola actually covered this track. Wilco has covered the song, and it's a beautiful song. If you haven't heard it, look it up. It's just a really simple piano riff, and then just some lyrics that my dad wrote, and then Jerry Miller does this really cool, like guitar interlude, and it's kind of simple, but it's a very hauntingly beautiful song. And then I have a fun story about Omaha too. The title for that came from Skip Spence. That's a Skip Spence song. And Skippy was meditating one day. And like, are you familiar with like Om, like in yoga?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So Skippy
Yeah.
was meditating and was saying Om. And then he was like, aha. So
That's so
Omaha.
cool. I think that you mentioned that on the website too. I did not know that.
Yeah,
That's such
I
a
like
great
that
story.
story.
Yeah, Skip Spence, boy, what a talent. What a talent that guy. There's a book, actually I want to ask you about. There's a book that was just recently put out on Skip that I want to ask you about. But
Huh.
yeah, Omaha, great song, but there are so many. Did your dad teach you what did you learn from him? Because my dad was a writer, and he
Oh,
taught me so much about being a writer. My dad was a broadcaster, so he taught me so much about being a broadcaster. It's like, what did you learn from your dad just by watching him, or things he told you about songwriting or anything involving music?
well, I mean, when I was young, I would I'd go to the studio with him a lot of the time. We had a studio in our house. I think I was just that his balladry kind of like that type, because I think where I got my like familiarity with like music that really like moves your soul was kind of from like hearing all his music, because all of his music really does that. And so I mean that subconsciously just created some kind of familiarity with those types of song structures. But then later I really started learning music from him, and I learned about like chord structures and different chord inversions, how to arrange a song, how to arrange a rock song, how to arrange a ballad, how three guitars fit together, and then how like still leave room for the bass and drums. Learn about harmony and just like not, yeah, like it's saying something unique, not doing the same thing over and over again
Yeah,
either was something that's really important.
that whole process is just fascinating to me. Also, lyrics, phrasing, how you sing, all that stuff is so fascinating to me. What comes to you? Do you hear a melody in your head? Like,
Yeah,
how do
like when
songs
I'm
start for you?
well, usually I'm playing something on an instrument, most likely guitar, like a chord progression or something, and then I will write lyrics to that, and like the melody and the lyrics kind of just come naturally depending on like what chords I'm playing. Yeah.
Do you record everything when you're playing, just in case?
Um, yeah, like I go on GarageBand and I'll make like a little demo or
Yeah,
something,
yeah.
but I wouldn't sometimes. I mean, sometimes if I'm like, I'll like make a little cover and I go on YouTube and I'm like, look at me. But
Yeah. Well, the Keith Richards story, right? With "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." Like he had a recorder going, and he started playing the riff, fell asleep, totally forgot about it. So the next morning he went back and played it. He's like, oh, okay. Thankfully he recorded that. Yeah.
yeah, that's why you want to always record your good ideas.
I want to ask about the title "Under the Stars," because your bio reads, quote, "Technically, Arwen Lewis inhabits our blue planet, but so much about her believes and belongs in the celestial realm." What led to your interest in celestial beings and the stars?
Oh God, I've always loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, I took an astronomy class in college, and I was like, oh my God, why didn't I find this sooner? But it was like at the end, and I was like, okay, it's too late to be an astrophysicist. But I mean, I guess if I had it my way now, I just, disappear and study the stars. Life would be easier that way, wouldn't it? Stars over
Yeah.
people. No, I'm just kidding. But I've always been really interested in it because it's so vast and mysterious, right? It's just, and it also, it's like if you think about like, what if I was just up there looking down? All of this is so minuscule, like, like all those, um, shots from Earth from like the Hubble or the James Webb telescope. It's like, if you look at it that way, it's like we're all just like mitochondria.
Isn't it amazing? Yeah.
And like that's, I don't know, I think it's a really an important philosophy to remember in life, like, and it's crazy too, because like each one of us have these like incredibly important and very very complex um you know lives, right? But at the same time, like, it's all so minuscule, it just depends on your perspective. And Under the Stars though came from just like every song, every story, and every song happened under the stars. It's kind of literal.
Yeah, that's cool. I guess the singer, songwriter, multi instrumentalist, and podcaster, I should mention, Arwen
Mm.
Lewis. And I mentioned that book on Skip Spence. Cam Cobb is the author, and he was on the podcast, and he wrote a great book on Skip. It's titled Weighted Down: The Complicated Life of Skip Spence. And he also wrote a book called What's Big and Purple and Lives in the Ocean, the Moby Grape Story. Have you read that one?
I have not read either, and I
Okay.
didn't even know they
Okay.
existed. I'm gonna have to
Well,
look them up.
he does them, he does them well. I mean,
Yeah.
he's clearly a fan, and it's written so well and respectfully. Has your dad ever thought about writing a book? Would you like to see him write one?
Yeah.
I know the
Like, I
fans
mean,
would.
he's a great storyteller. Um, yeah, that would be really cool. You know what? I remember ever since I was little, when my parents were raising my brother and I, we had bunk beds in my room. So like my brother would like come in, sleep on the top bunk, and my dad would read us stories or just like tell us stories to go to sleep. Or, he'd take us on walks when we were kids, for like hours up the beach or up rivers, and, tell us stories. And that's just part of who he is. And I mean, that's just engraved in his subconscious too, because he was raised around, Hollywood and film, and he saw all the Broadway musicals when he was in New York. And I think that element of storytelling is just part of who he is. And he also, that influenced his music a lot, especially the Broadway compositions. I feel like you can hear that a lot in his music, the way chords move. Like sometimes, like, cause like sometimes like certain sections of his songs will literally just like go into like another key, and like musically, I don't know, like doesn't always like quote unquote make sense, but it sounds interesting. And I think that's why he's such a great composer too.
Well, and just the stories he could tell. He was part of such a great era in rock history,
Yeah.
that the San Francisco late 60s scene. Did you ever ask him about people that he knew? And
Oh
he must
yeah.
have
Oh, he'll just
stories.
start talking about it.
Oh my God.
Oh,
I
it's too many
love
to
it.
count. Yeah.
Yeah. So was he buddies with the guys in Grateful Dead and all that? I mean,
Yeah, he played with them.
so
They
cool,
gave
man.
him I think it was a Gretsch. I have a picture of him playing a Gretsch that they gave him. I mean, he played with everybody. A lot of like things that like weren't publicized. Played with Jimi Hendrix.
Wow.
They like hung out with him, and they were all staying in the same hotel. And he was a bad mother. You don't mess with Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good, bad, like bad A.
Yeah.
But yeah. And and then there was this place called the Ark in Sausalito. It was an old like abandoned like ferry boat where they would perform shows, and Moby Grape would perform there, Crosby, Stills and Nash would perform there. They'd all just like have song swaps and things like that. So a lot of that music was they were all around each other, influencing each other, just like we were talking about earlier, how like I thought like that Moby Grape influenced punk. um they were part of a scene with them, and Moby Grape has an album called Wow, that they got the name from the album because David Crosby popped his head in the dressing room after one of their shows, and he was like,
That's awesome.
yeah.
That is so cool. Yeah. Moby Grape were, I would think Woodstock too. Were they,
They weren't at Woodstock,
they
no.
weren't in there, but were they asked to, or was that
I don't
ever?
what happened. I
on the
literally, I don't
table.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
What about, so you're the granddaughter of Oscar winning actress Loretta Young. Okay.
Mhm.
So she's your dad's
My dad's mom. Yeah.
mom.
Mhm.
Okay. Did you have a close relationship with her?
Yeah. I mean, she passed away when I was 12, but she was just my grandmother.
Yeah.
Um, I don't even know if, I mean, I guess I didn't even know what being famous meant. Yeah. So, I
Yeah.
mean, we would just like hang out and we'd watch movies together. And she had Titanic before it came out on like before it came out, but she had the VHS because she was on the Academy board. I begged and begged and begged her to let me take it home.
Yeah.
And she wouldn't let me, but then she sent it to me in the mail like a week later. And she's like, okay, you can have it for 2 weeks and then you have to send it back. But then she didn't make me send it back. And she would
That's cool.
always send us, like, she'd always get these like cool toys for whatever reason. So we always had like the quirkiest, cool little like toys that nobody could find. So her thing was like, she just wanted to, make people feel joy, it brought her joy to make people feel joy and to be a good example and to lift people up. And she was magical. She had like a magical thing, but she was also very Catholic, and she took me to confession when I was like 10 and I didn't know what to do, so I made something up.
Oh, man. Wow. That's
Yeah.
cool. That's cool.
Mhm.
Well, this podcast focuses on books on rock, thus the
Nice.
title. So I'd love to know if you have any favorite rock and roll books that you've read.
Oh yeah, there's what is it? Willie Nelson. There's one of
Okay.
the, let me hear. Let me all right, this is a podcast, right? Let me hear
Sure.
it
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
or video, right?
It's video. She's getting up, finding a book, folks.
This is
Okay.
It's A
Willing.
Long Story
Oh,
by
yeah.
Willie Nelson. Yeah, this is a good one.
What an amazing artist, man. And he is still going. He is late 80s now.
Yeah, he's I've been to Lukenbach, but he wasn't there when I was there. Lukenbach is, I think, he owns it. It's in, and then he talks about in his book he has his own town that he named Luck.
Wow.
So when you're in his town, you're in luck.
Yeah. What do you look for in a book that, especially if it's a autobiography? What do you hope that someone covers in their book?
That they find a way to tell like an intriguing story about their life in a way that, I don't know, kind of shines light and purpose and gives inspiration to the person who's reading it, and
Yeah.
really tells a story about the human experience, however they experienced it. Yeah.
I love that, and I also love just the minutia of how songs are written. That
Yeah.
again, I'm just fascinated with that. So I always love when you read books and they talk about the things that may have happened when they were recording the guitar solo and or whatever, how they wrote the song. By the way, Willie Nelson, 91.
Is he?
Yeah, born April
Wow.
29th, 1933. Amazing.
He is just he's stellar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you take on the role of interviewer in your podcast, the Arwen Lewis Show. So tell us about the podcast.
Oh, the podcast has been so fun. It was completely not something I pursued or expected. The reason why I have it is because I was producing a concert series in Buellton, California, for a venue called the Hitching Post, and my executive producer Jeremiah Higgins wanted to interview Frank Ostini, the owner of the restaurant, because the restaurant was in this movie called Sideways. Have you heard of Sideways? It's like a wine
Oh,
movie by Alexander
okay.
Payne.
I wonder. I may have
And
seen it.
it's kind of like one of those cult movies.
Okay.
But anyway, so Jeremiah wanted to interview Frank, and then because I was producing a concert series, Frank was just really generous, and he was like, "Arwen, do you want to come on the radio show with me and talk about the concert series and talk about your music?" And I was like, "Well, of course I want to do that. I love talking about myself." No, and so uh, and then so I did that, and Jeremiah invited me to bring all of the artists from the concert series on his show and co-host and promote the concert series. And then Jeremiah was like, Arwen, you're so good at interviewing people. Do you want your own radio show? And I was like, yeah, like why? Of course I would like my own
Okay.
radio show. This was terrestrial radio in Santa Barbara, California. So yeah, I've done over 100 episodes. It's been a little over a year. And that was called a station called KZSB. They sold, so we moved to primarily podcast. I have a station on Pantheon, and we have so they distribute to all of the major podcast platforms for us, and then give us a station for each of the shows on Evolve Entertainment. And then I'm also on 6 syndicated streaming stations for Radio Candy Media. And so that's been really nice. And what I love about the podcast is just getting to meet so many talented musicians and getting to discover all this great music. And um, everybody's got their own story. And
I was just about to say everybody's got an interesting story. Yeah.
yeah. And yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. Everybody's life is interesting. I mean, it's just all about just you asking the right questions. I mean, somebody's always got some crazy story to tell or interesting story. By the way, the Pantheon, I do have friends who have podcasts on Pantheon, like My Weekly Mixtape.
Okay.
I know there's a few more in here. Oh, Shout It Out Loudcast, the Kiss podcast. Yep. Those guys just put out a book. I'm talking to them in a week or two.
Nice.
So yeah, that's a great. Oh, the Rush fan podcast. I love podcasts. I worked in radio for many, many years. And then when I started listening to podcasts, I was like, wow, this is what FM radio was like in the late 60s, early 70s, like free form, no restrictions, no limits, like a empty canvas, and you just do whatever you want with it. And that's what I love about it.
Totally. It's like the new indie radio or something.
Nobody's telling you have to. Like in radio, they'd say, well, you 15 seconds. Like we have the log and it would say you got 15 seconds here max. That's it. You can't talk more than that, or you have to read the liner note. And then with podcasting, it's just you do whatever you want, which I love. I love. As for future goals, so I read that you're looking to eventually write and record in the realm of alternative music and some classical and jazz nuances. That's according to the website. So is that what I know you said you can't say specifically what's coming next, but is that connected?
Not what's going to be released coming soon. Yeah, no, but I mean, I definitely want to make another record and want to find the right producer. Like I want to co-produce it, with somebody. I don't know. I don't know if I've met the person yet, but I'll know when it's time. But I also want to, kind of extend my musicianship. And before I do that, I want more freedom as a musician to be able to, I don't know, just create more and compose more in depth and more sophisticated music, and then kind of work with somebody who can help me do that as well. And I want to do that again. I just don't know when that will happen, but I know it will. That's kind of like I'm still performing and doing things like that. Like my dad and I and our bandmate George Adrian have like a songwriting trio that we've been working on for like 10 years, and we were just finishing some live recordings. So me and Dad and George are performing tomorrow night. But yeah, I'm kind of ready to take a little break from performing. I feel like I've like plateaued. Like I don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Okay.
So
like set list songs you're playing.
Yeah. And like style, like the same, playing the kind of the same way that I've just been doing. And I just feel like, I want to take some, because it's hard for me to create when I'm just kind of like doing and performing,
right,
like I'm focusing on something that I'm executing. Like it's easier for me to have, my creativity to expand when that's the only thing that I'm allowing to happen musically and artistically.
Well, that's what I wonder about bands and artists who've been around for a long time. How do they keep it interesting for themselves? Which there are bands like Grateful Dead that they don't stick to the same set list every night, but there are bands and artists like you got to play the hits. This is what the encore is going to be. How does an artist keep themselves motivated and keep that fire going? A lot of them will just say, as soon as they hit the stage and they play that song that they've played a million times, once they see the audience react, that matters. But how do you keep it interesting?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of money behind those people you're probably talking about. Money is the answer.
Yes.
If it smells like money, I'll do anything.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, no, but it's true though. Like I know a lot of guys just, we played that hit so many times, but once you start seeing the look on people, because there's a lot of people in the audience that have only heard that song for the first time. This is the first time.
No, and that's true. Like you are, I mean, I don't have anthems like that, right? But I mean, if you're at like a Queen or something, that's going to be fun every night. And I don't I mean, I have people that I love playing with, but I mean, if I had a group of people or somebody that I was working with and we were so excited and feeding off of each other, that would be, like when you're, and I mean, but that takes like support too, like financial support and like by your fans and by a big label and being on a big tour. Like that's kind of on a different level that I'm on. But I think if you're on that level, like, yeah, it's exciting. Like that's, amazing. But for me, and I don't know that that's something that I'm concerned with. Like and I'm going and I'm performing in this festival on Friday too with in Santa Barbara, like with this other really accomplished artist. So like I like playing with other people who play like in a way that I wouldn't think of that's like really sophisticated. That's really fun for me. And that's where the art starts to open up. So experiences like that are really cool. But I'm just kind of like a simple artist more than
Yeah.
like an arena player. But I would like to play like in like really fancy theaters and cathedrals and like travel around the world and play in all like historic venues like that
Yeah,
that
that'd be
have a
cool.
really spiritual energy, like with like a core group of musicians that you're conversing with musically. Yeah, that would be a beautiful experience.
What's the longest distance you've gone to play a show?
Well, I'm in California, so I guess to New York, and then I go
Yeah.
to Austin once a year. Um, and then luckily I live around the corner from the club where I play once or
Oh,
twice a month. So
perfect.
yeah, I'm kind of
Perfect.
lucky. And
Yeah.
I go to LA, San
Cool.
Francisco. Yeah.
So where can people find you online? Where can people get your music? Let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can go to my website, arwenlewismusic.com, or my Instagram is at Arwen Lewis, and Facebook, I'm just under my name, Arwen Lewis.
Cool. And the podcast too, people can find that. I think they can link up to it through your website too. I'm on your website right now,
Not,
I
I
believe, or
need to
no, I think,
update that,
yeah.
but there's the arwenlewisshow.com. You can go
Yeah.
there. And then Pantheon Podcasts, the Arwen Lewis Show has this channel on there. And then the Arwen Lewis Show, you can just Google it. It's on any of your favorite podcast platforms. And then there's an Instagram page for that too at the Arwen Lewis Show.
Great. Arwen, thanks so much. This is great.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a very fun chat.